Alright everybody, hello and welcome to Mondays with Monte. I am Montegomery, and today I'm going to be talking about game sense. Now, what is game sense? Well, game sense is a player skill. It is the ability of a player to understand, read, and even predict the game at a strategic level. And when I say a strategic level, I'm talking big picture, theater of war level thought. The things you do in a lane, those little fiddly things, maneuvers and jukes, that's more of a tactical, small scale level. And we're talking big scale. We're talking game sense. The types of questions that game sense tends to relate to are big questions like, where is the enemy team? What are they doing? Where's my team? What are they doing? Where do I fit into all of this? It's that very high-level, abstract thought process. And as a result, it's kind of one of the most commonly underdeveloped skills in a League of Legends player. And it's perfectly understandable. There are a lot of things that get in the way of learning game sense. For one, when something happens in a game, good or bad, usually there's not a whole lot of time to take a moment and step back and say, I wonder. There just isn't that time. Say, for example, you get ganked in your lane. You've just been horribly and brutally murdered. I'm sure that's a lot of fun. The things that are going to be going on in your head are generally not big questions, like, was there any way that I could have foreseen that? Was there some hint in the other lanes? Is there something about that jungler? That's generally not what's on your mind. What's usually on your mind is, I didn't dodge that skill shot. If only I'd landed that ability, maybe I could have got away. Oh god, now I'm behind in my lane. What am I going to do? I need to buy some items. And by the time you're through that sort of grieving process, as it were, your death timer's already up, you're already halfway back to your lane, and any chance you had of taking a moment to just pause and think about the bigger picture is kind of out the window. And that makes it very hard to develop game sense in the middle of a lane. Eventually, through experience, you'll just learn that it's kind of a bad idea to push forward or Shaco will kill you. But it can be a very long and painful process. And there are other things that make learning game sense hard as well. For example, the early game tends to be fairly light on game sense. There's not a whole lot that's going on that really requires it. The only real moving parts are the jungler, and occasionally mid or top lane will roam, and on a rare occasion bottom lane is so horrifically fed that they will also start pushing objectives. But generally, each of the lanes is fairly self-contained outside of the jungler, and it's mostly about those little tactical things that I mentioned before. It's only when you get into the mid-game, and the much later stages of the game, that game sense becomes tantamount, and really the most important thing that's happening. And at the same time, the number of moving parts has just increased 3 or 4-fold. It's really hard to know what it is you're supposed to do, or even what your team's supposed to do, when there's 5 of you that are supposed to be working in concert, and you're in solo queue so you don't even know each other. It's a very difficult thing. So because of this, game sense is hard to learn, and naturally as a result, most people haven't really developed it to a very strong level. And it's nothing to be ashamed of, like I said. This is hard stuff, but it's a very common problem. If you've ever read the forums, you've seen a lot of posts, probably, about ELO Hell, and there are very, very many different complaints. But one of the most common ones that many players will post goes something like this. I almost always win my lane, and then my team is bad and everything goes to hell and I just can't win. This game sucks, QQ, I'm uninstalling and I'm going to go play Hello Kitty Island Adventure. You've probably seen that sort of post before. I know I have many times. And some of those players almost certainly have overestimated their own abilities, but not all of them. There are actually a fair number who do actually win their lane maybe 7 out of 10 or even 8 out of 10 times. But somehow they are simply unable to take that advantage and convert it into a victory. And that reason is most often game sense. They just, once the game gets going on too long into the mid-game and the late game, they're just not really sure where they need to be, what they should be doing, and as a result, even though they're otherwise a very good player, they just don't really help their team the way they should. And we're going to see a few of those players today as I go through a replay that I played fairly recently. And just keep in mind that this is not something that you should feel bad about. This is a very hard skill to learn. Even the pro players have trouble with this. Double Lift was well known for a long time for having fairly bad game sense. He would just push and farm, and then people would come to kill him. And sometimes he'd do some really crazy awesome play, some great tactics, and he'd come out alive when he otherwise shouldn't have. But a lot of the time he'd just die for no good reason, and that hurt CLG a number of times. And so this is not something to really be self-conscious about, but it is an edge that you can eke out against your opponents. So with all of that said, let's look at the replay. So in this game, I'm here and I'm going to be playing Singed. I'm playing with my good buddy Pete. He's on Leona. I didn't get to AD carry. Such is my fate in life. But I'm playing everyone's favorite drug addict. I don't know what else to call him. Singed. And we're going to see in this game a number of players and a number of ideas that happen that they kind of work out, but really they shouldn't. These are the kinds of deceptive things that can make game sense hard to learn. Actions you take that they work out very well and very fine, but in a much higher ranking game, you would just get utterly crushed because it's just bad practice. These are just pretty poor ideas. And one of these things that's going to happen is going to start because we learn that Varus and Tarek are in this bush. This trap just revealed them, and this is actually a pretty common situation. They're thinking of doing golems over here once they spawn, and so they're hiding out in this bush just to make sure nobody's going to come and mess them up. And when this sort of thing happens, often their team is somewhere else, and they're actually in a fairly vulnerable position. If all of us go and sneak around this way, just past red buff and around here, they really can't see us coming. We're going to be all the way over here in the fog of war before they would even see it happening. And that's not a very typical thing at this level to happen. And even though I suggest it, Nunu is kind of skeptical. He's like, let's not do that. But what we see here is Talon has decided on his own that he's going to make something happen. And so he walks into this bush. Now, we happen to know for a fact that Olaf is all the way over here, and Oriana's all the way over here, and Skarner hasn't even bought his items yet, probably because he's running League of Legends on a toaster. So, we know that this bush was safe. But if we were to restrict ourselves to team vision, all we know was that a little while ago, Tarek and Varus were in this bush. The rest of the team, or even they, could have moved into this bush to protect against an invasion. They could just all be here preparing for an invasion. Any sort of thing could have gone horribly wrong, and this could have been first blood. And if we continue, Talon will actually even run into this bush, which again could very easily have been first blood, and even this bush could still be dangerous because the rest of the team could be right here waiting to come in and do horrible, horrible things to Caitlyn and anybody foolish enough to come in. Generally, doing anything on your own like this in the early game is very dangerous. You really want to be with your team because in the worst case scenario, 5 people are very scary even when there are 5 other people there. Things worked out fine though. Nothing really bad happened to Talon. Everybody else was somewhere else, so it wasn't a big deal. But that could very easily lead to danger, as could what Nunu is doing now. He's going to steal this big Wraith. But again, if we look at his vision, we don't really know where the heck the rest of the enemy team is. And when he started doing this, the only person who was anywhere nearby was Leona. Otherwise, he was on his own. If the whole enemy team suddenly emerged from this bush, he would probably have been in a heap of trouble, and all over a Wraith, which is worth all of 25 gold. Not really worth it. And this is a very nice ward from Miscue on Leona, but otherwise, this was a very, very risky play, and it doesn't really get you all that much. 25 gold, little experience, not really worth it when you weigh that against first blood for the enemy team. But again, because this is low ranking, this works out even though it really shouldn't most of the time. A lot of the time there's going to be somebody either checking this or there's going to be other things going on which make this very, very risky. And speaking of risky, Skarner, just not even giving me a chance to rest, is going to also do something very risky. Perhaps the riskiest play so far. He got a very good leash at blue, so he's going to come and try to steal Nunu's red buff. Now the thing about this that's very wrong is that under normal circumstances, if Nunu had done the typical route and done wolves before blue, Nunu would already have been heading to raids. And a very standard practice for experienced junglers is when you get to wraiths, or immediately after, you just sort of poke your head up around here and check your red buff to make sure nobody's being cheeky and trying to steal it. Nunu does not do this, but if he did, you can see that Skarner, having been totally beat the crap out of by blue buff, drops very, very low. And if Nunu were just to have been a little faster and peeked his way over here, and even if he just checked this right before he did wraiths, or even right now, he'd see that Skarner was here, he could have pinged me and maybe I wouldn't have gotten hurt by Olaf, and something could have happened and he could have died. Very, very risky play, and it worked out again, but almost entirely because of just a lack of experience on the enemy team. It's not a really sound decision. And that's the key thing here. None of these things that have happened so far have been sound. They've just been relying on the enemy team not knowing or not doing some very basic, easy things that could get you in a heck of a lot of trouble if they did them. Now, we're going to notice something happening here as well. I'm staying at this tower, despite the fact that I only have 2 bars of health. There's an angry Olaf right here, and Skarner just showed his face. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm making a sound decision. I'm using information that I have available to me to understand the state of the game. Skarner did just come by, but he was actually really low on health, and he even took a tower hit, dropping him even lower. And as a result, I know that if Skarner were to hang around here and try to dive me, I could probably engineer a situation where, at the very worst, at least one of the people who'd be trying to dive me would die. And if it was Skarner, it would really, really, really hurt his jungle. And I'd probably also get some experience from the things dying here, and in the end, it would work out okay. It wouldn't be a big deal. And in the best case scenario, I could engineer a situation where 2 people died. And so I'm actually pretty confident that this Olaf's not going to do a lot to me. I've got a Doran shield, so his axe doesn't do a whole lot of damage, and he doesn't have very many ranks in his E yet. So if even he alone tries to dive me, it's not going to work out very well. He can't hit his axes to save his life, but that's beside the point. Even if he could, I'm actually fairly safe here. Nunu's nearby. Everything works out pretty well. And this is the difference between just a sort of random low-ranking decision where you just steal a Wraith, or steal a red, or try to make something happen. Those decisions just weren't sound. They didn't really account for things that the unknowns, the knowns, all of that. It was just a decision that seemed fairly good at the time, very blindery, just immediate surrounding kind of decisions. Whereas this, I'm taking into account Skarner's position, I'm taking into account what Olaf can do, that his Ignite's already down, all of that stuff allowed me to make a sound decision. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit, because the next 14 minutes or so are not particularly interesting, and we're going to go see another sound decision that I make much, much later in the game. We're going to go ahead to about the 17-minute and 50-second mark. Now, if we track me again, Olaf has just gotten himself caught out, and he dies a horrible, painful death. And if we look at the state of the game from my perspective, there's really nothing to prevent me from just pushing top a little bit. Skarner and Orianna are mid, Olaf's dead. If people come up here, if it's Varus and Taric or whatever, I'm pretty safe. I'm very tanky, I've got my ultimate and my ghost. They're not really going to be able to do anything to me, even though my turret's gone. And Orianna's still mid, and look, here's Taric, here's Skarner. There's stuff happening, I'm perfectly safe pushing top. And now we see there are actually 4 people here, but things are okay. Talon and Miss Q are, okay, things are not actually that good there. And if I were to teleport in here to try to save this turret, chances are I would just end up like this Nunu who just gets beat the crap up and doesn't actually accomplish anything. So I just keep pushing top. And this is a sound decision. I know where the entire enemy team is, I know Olaf's respawning, and I'm very, very safe. Now they've taken out the turret, and it's still questionable. Maybe I could have saved it, maybe not. There is some subjectivity here, but I'm going to go, and I'm going to retreat, because I don't want to die. That would be bad. If the whole enemy team came, I could be in trouble. And I'm recalling in this bush. Now this looks like a very, very bad place to recall, but again, I'm using a little bit of experience and game sense. I know that the last thing they knew was that I was probably running this way. And at this stage of the game, the chances that this bush is warded is very, very, very low. So they don't really know where I've gone. So they're going to come around here and through here trying to find me. And if, on the off chance, somebody does find me, I have this avenue of escape. I've got my ghost, I've got my ultimate, and with all of them trying to block my escapes off over this way, this is almost a home free way. They'll never catch me with my ghost, and I'll be, in the worst case, I'll just blow a summoner spell or an ultimate, and I'll be fine. So, in fact, Tarek is going to come right by here, he doesn't see me, and I'm safe. But even if he had walked into the bush, and even if he had stunned me, I would have been okay, because they would not have been able to cut me off with my ghost and my ultimate. And in the end, I didn't get a whole lot of damage on this turret, but I also didn't teleport uselessly in here and accomplish nothing. Which is actually going to be very important, because it's going to allow me to teleport in here right about now. We're going to see a good use of teleport, and why you need to be kind of aware of the fact that somebody on the enemy team has teleport, because this poor Varus just walked right into me, and that's just going to take him right out of the team fight, because my poison hurts and Talon just cleaned up. Generally, a singed teleporting on top of you is one of the worst things that can ever happen to you in this game. You really don't want that. Now, of course, I'm just being a little cheeky here. I'm diving a turret on this poor Tarek. And this is just the sort of thing you can do on Singed if you're farming pretty well and you've got tanky stats and you're going full defense masteries and whatnot. Push turrets, take damage. If you're a Nunu, you probably don't want to ult in range of a tower when there's an Orianna there who can do a bunch of damage. That's kind of a bad idea. But in general, outside of tactical missteps from Talon and Nunu, this kind of thing is working out pretty well for us. We're going to get this Orianna, and I'm going to die to a Flash Skarner ult. Such is the fate of things. But again, game sense kept me safe. I was able to push a little bit on this turret. I didn't save this turret, but I was able to teleport and make some things happen as a result because I saved it. And again, these things can be subjective. That was a little, I could have gone either way. But again, it's game sense, it's experience. You have to know your limits. You have to be able to guess a few things. It's not a big deal if you occasionally guess wrong. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit more here to some more interesting action. Now, this is going to be a little bit of context for a decision that comes up. We're going to try to do Baron, we the purple team, and they're going to try to stop us. And this is going to work out pretty well for us, maybe, kind of, we hope. We're going to get Baron if everything goes well. They know we're doing Baron because they have a ward in this bush right here. And I'm doing the usual Singed thing and just being a jerk and getting in their way, dropping my slows and chasing after them. And they're working very, very hard on this Baron. My team is very into this, getting this Baron. Orianna's here, and here comes Olaf. And poor Caitlyn kind of just stood there and let Olaf walk right up to her. Our team's getting kind of destroyed. We've got Baron buff, though. Well, there goes Orianna, and it turns out that I just totally took out Varus. So it's 2v3, but the key thing here is that we took out their damage dealers, and because I still have a damage dealer on my team, and I'm Singed, and they kind of just lost all of theirs, we can actually pull this out. Some tactical missteps from my team by just sitting around and letting the enemy team walk right up to them when they could have kind of kited their way away from Baron, but otherwise it works out pretty well. And here's the decision point. Now, if Talon and I were to just come right here and kill these creeps, we could push this turret very easily. But Talon has decided that he wants to push mid, and he's going to come here and he's going to get this farm, which is, mind you, about the same amount of farm as is right here. And he's going to push this mid turret. But note the health of this mid turret. It basically has none. If Miss Q were feeling industrious right now, him and Leona, he could just sneak right up to here, auto-attack it once or twice, it would die, and then he could go away. It doesn't need to be anybody in particular to take out this turret. We don't even need to push the creeps to it, and we can take it away. So this turret is really the bigger deal. But this Talon, who I'll note, is doing very, very well for himself. He's 11, 5, and 3. He's been absolutely cleaning up. He's great. We managed to do an amazing 2v4 because the enemy team split up, and he was able to take out Orianna while I took out Varus, and all sorts of great stuff. He's doing a fantastic job. But when it comes to this kind of decision, he doesn't really know what's the best thing to do. He wants to get this farm, and he wants to get this turret that's easy to get, but really, with his damage and my ability to just make Tarek cry, we could easily take this turret and even sweep around and just get a free auto-off on this, and get a bigger return. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. I just kind of derp around this turret because I'm Singed. I don't really have all that much attack damage without my ultimate. Pushing the turret for Singed is a lot more about getting a big creep wave there than it is about him actually attacking it himself, at least at this stage of the game, where most of my items are tanky items. So I'm just, trying to get in the way of Tarek because he's going to try to stop me from pushing the turret. And meanwhile, Talon does pick up this turret, but we could have had this turret instead. If he had just come right here, he could have been attacking it this whole time. It could be going down. And while he does come and he does pick up this Tarek kill, we don't get this turret. We get the easy peasy turret that anybody could have gotten. Nunu could have gotten that turret on his own. And we miss out on this one. It even barely takes any damage. And that's the kind of decision that you're probably not going to be able to make that decision with that experience. But it's the kind of thing that if you just think about what happened, go over it in a replay or something like that, you can figure out, you know what? I did enough damage that I could probably have taken that out. And, you might take 3 or 4 or 5 times of those kinds of situations to really get it. But if you just think about it, whenever it happens, you can come to a better conclusion. So, moving right along again, we're going to get some more context, another team fight of epic proportions, potentially, depending on how you look at it. And we're going to see another decision that doesn't really work. We're having this team fight. Skarner's out of position, Varus is down here, Olaf is going for Talon instead of Caitlyn. That's not going to work out too well for him, he just gets murdered. And overall, this team fight's working out pretty well. Leona has sacrificed herself for the greater cause, but we ended up getting 3 for 1. Oriana's trying to book it away. I don't know if I'll manage to catch her, but this has worked out pretty well. But notice again, another decision point. Talon has kind of run off this way to go push bottom. Now, right now, we could very easily, with my tankiness, and Caitlyn's damage and Talon's damage, push down this turret very quickly, especially with Blood Boil, and also possibly take out the inhibitor. There are some long death timers here that we could take advantage of, and Oriana is running out of mana, and she's not really in a very good position to stop us. However, Talon is again going for farm, and he's going to push bottom. And it's actually going to look like it works out pretty well for him. But that's not as well as it could be. He's going to push, and he's actually going to get this tower, which is a little low. But in return, we actually don't get this tower. Caitlyn makes another tactical mistake. Not really the subject of this show, but she makes a tactical mistake and dies to the turret. Nuna's taken a lot of damage, and just as a result, we actually can't push this turret. And if the enemy team were to act more quickly than they do, they possibly could even have stopped Talon from pushing this turret, which he will do shortly. They're a little bit more concerned with what I'm doing middle at the moment, but in general, we could very easily have gotten nothing out of this. And even though we do get this turret, because Talon does a heck of a lot of damage, as you can see, he mows that thing down. Even though we do get that turret thanks to the minions, this could have just worked out a heck of a lot better for us. We could have had an inhibitor turret down, we could have had even potentially an inhibitor, and instead we get into another team fight. It's a little awkward because Caitlyn's not here, I'm low on health, I get ignited, I'm just gonna die anyway, might as well run into the enemy team. And I bite the dust, oh poor me. And, we at least trade 1 for 1. Here we got the Skarner. It's not the best. We kind of at least escaped even there, but we could have had this turret, and instead, all we got was this. And, as you might imagine, that decision is kind of subtle. I'm going to take a moment here to talk to you face to face. These kinds of decisions, as you can see, they're not clear-cut, black and white decisions. It was not a terrible idea to go and try and push bottom. There was a turret there. It was kind of low. You could definitely get that turret with a little effort. But it could have just been better. With a little bit of more awareness, he could have seen, hey, my whole team's going mid. If I go with them, we can possibly take down that mid turret with my damage and maybe even get an inhibitor. The enemy team's not going to be back for 30 seconds. We've got plenty of time. When you've gotten enough experience, you start being able to make those sorts of decisions if you just pay a little bit of attention and look these things over later. And it can be very hard sometimes to see that, because he did get that bottom turret, and it's easy to think, I've done a good job, when sometimes, you could have done a better job. Don't stress too much about it, but just try to be aware of the things that could have been, and try them decisively. Even though that was a mistake on Talon's part, as long as you're very decisive about your mistakes, it does make it easier to pick up on them. If you're very indecisive and wishy-washy about your choices, it becomes a heck of a lot harder to know what could have been, because you end up not doing anything. And we'll see a little bit of that later. But for now, back to the replay. So, nothing much happened here, and that's unfortunate. But things will happen in earnest fairly soon. We're going to go forward to 3021, and we're in a setup here where Baron is going to be spawning very soon. I've informed my team that in exactly 40 seconds, Baron is going to be coming back up, and we should all group up here to make something happen. If you need to buy, you need to do so now. So Talon is being a dear, and he's recalling immediately. 30 seconds will be more than enough time for him to run straight to Baron, and we can possibly do it. Nunu is a little slower out of the gate. And this is actually going to be a very big problem, because not only does he take longer to recall, but he kind of sits here in the fountain for a long time. Now, how often have you seen this happen in a game where a player just, Baron or Dragon was coming up, and where were they? They were back in base buying. They were taking their very sweet time buying. Like, look at this right now. Baron is up in 3 seconds, and Nunu's all the way out here. And here's Baron, Nunu's here. Talon has inexplicably decided to go bottom, despite my counsel, and as a result, this Baron is not going to happen. We see the enemy team coming. My massive ward coverage, made in concert with Leona, is worthless outside of warning us of impending danger, because the team just wasn't there right at spawn. Maybe we wouldn't have been able to take it even if we were all there. Maybe we would. But at the very least, we could have done something tricky. Like, they don't really have ward coverage, and we knew it. Because we'd cleared it all out, it was fine. And we could have all hidden in this bush, and if we were to have gone back and looked, Olaf, Varus, and Orianna were the first responders. They were the ones who would have run right into this bush, and the best Nunu ult in the world would have just hit them, and everything would have been fantastic and hunky-dory. Talon would have cleaned up, we would have aced them, it would have been grand. Instead, Talon was way bottom, Nunu wasn't even here, and all we could do was back off. Not the best thing in the world. But the next best thing would have Talon here, because, as you can see, we're almost 10k gold ahead. We're far enough ahead that if we want to, we can just fight them, and we can probably just murder them. Except Talon's not here. So we have to do this sort of standoffish kind of thing and hope that Talon can accomplish something by split pushing bottom. When actually, if that was going to be our plan, the dude with teleport, who exudes toxic gases and all of that, would probably have been the better choice, because if something stupid were to happen, he could at least arrive and perhaps salvage the situation. Now, who wants to bet that something stupid happens? So, for those of you who would like a lesson in tactical decisions, using a Nunu ultimate on Taric is a bad tactical decision. Don't do this when the entire enemy team is kind of right there, because all you do is use your ultimate on Taric, and then the rest of the enemy team just says, hey, Nunu ultimate's down, we just did a bunch of damage to them, and we can just kill them. So as you can see, poor Leona has died because of Nunu's mistake. Nunu has died, and in general, our ability to stand off and hold them at bay has drastically reduced. Skarner has willingly gone back because we're just getting our butts kicked, and even though we do get the tower and the inhibitor, if Talon had just been with us, we could have just murdered the enemy team, taken Baron, and probably taken out a tower and inhibitor. And obviously, this is again fairly subtle. It's not a very clear thing when you're in the game, when your head is in the here and now, and filled with the concrete things, rather than these abstract, lofty thoughts of strategy. But you need to be able to learn these things if you want to have some sort of success at the higher rankings, because being that grossly out of position in a game that was more even could very easily have just handed Baron to the enemy team. And if he'd been with us, we could have just aced them and had a grand old time, and the game could have ended here rather than 20 minutes from now. So here's the 30th minute, and we're going to try again for Baron. Now it's warded, and we're aware of that. But if Talon were to just come, we could probably kill it before they could do anything, because Olaf and Orianna are gone. But note what Talon just did. He's gone back to buy. And this is another very classic scenario that happens all the time. If he were to just come here and help me and Nunu and Leona and eventually Caitlyn, who is protecting this tower, just take Baron, it would be dead, we could go away, he could buy, everyone would want to go back and buy, and everything would be grand. Instead, he's back in base, and now the enemy team, especially Olaf, is actually going to get here first. And that's kind of bad. I mean, if we look at the damage and we look at the timing, I mean, Caitlyn's here, she got here a little late, but she was protecting the tower. That's okay. But if you look at the damage, we're actually getting this down pretty fast. We started it a little late, though, because we were worried because Talon went back. And Caitlyn almost gets it. Now, imagine if Talon had been here. There's only 1,600 health left. If Talon had been here, Baron would already be dead. And Nunu's inexplicable decision to leave Baron alone, I mean, if he were at Baron right now, he could consume it and smite it, and we would have Baron. Instead, he's come out here to use his Nunu ult on Olaf. And Taric, of all champions, manages to steal Baron from us. And this does not go well. Talon dies, Pete dies on Leona, he's gone, Nunu dies, and in my desperate attempts to save Caitlyn and even be a little cheeky, even I kick the bucket. This was a disaster. And why was it a disaster? Because of a very common game sense mistake. If Talon had just stayed with us and just done Baron, he still would have been able to go back and buy his Mercurial Scimitar and this pickaxe. He still would have been able to complete those items before the next team fight, because there wouldn't have been a next team fight at Baron. We would have taken Baron, we would have gone home happy, and everything would be hunky-dory. But instead, he went back and bought, we tried to do Baron, we got pretty close, and then, also due to Nunu's inexplicable tactical error, we did not get Baron, and the enemy team has now come back with a vengeance. This, to put it bluntly, is not good. But rather than watch the next painful 10 minutes, we are again going to skip forward to the 44th minute to see some more stuff happen. Another decision point. Now, here we are going to have another standoff at Baron. There's a ward right here, they know that they're hiding in this bush, but the enemy team is still reeling a little bit, and we're going to try to do Baron. There will be a standoff. Things will be big. I'm actually at the 43rd minute. How did I manage that? 44 minutes and 30 seconds. So here's the actual Baron standoff. They're all hiding in this bush. They think we don't know they're there, but what they don't know is that we are all in this bush, save for Talon and Caitlyn. So we're going to see a very classic blunder that teams make, where all of a sudden the enemy tanks shoot out of the bush towards your squishies and things go horribly, horribly wrong for your team. So I'm all up in the carries' faces. I'm making them miserable. We're doing pretty good here. Olaf goes down without killing Caitlyn. Talon's doing damage. Pete's taking a lot of damage. There goes Skarner. The carries are still up. Pete finally kicks the bucket on Leona. Nunu's taking a lot of damage, but he flashes to safety. Taric goes down, and we get the GA on Varus. It's an exciting team fight. Nunu makes a tactical error by standing next to a dude who can auto-attack him and kill him in one hit. Orianna gets away, but it was all in all a good team fight. And again, we have a decision point for Talon. Now, Talon, again, I'd like to point out, is doing very well as a player. He's 17-8-8. He's been absolutely murdering people all game. And again, he's kind of lacking in game sense. There are three really important things that could happen right now. We can take Baron, we can try to save our turrets, which are getting pushed, or we can try and backdoor some inhibitors. Those are the three things that could happen right now. And his presence isn't necessarily needed at Baron. Caitlyn's pretty good on health. I've got enough health to tank it. We could do okay. But instead of doing any of those three things, Talon tries to push mid, when there's a humongous wave of creeps, including super minions, all the way back here. And he actually doesn't really know what to do. He sort of tries to push, and then he realizes this isn't working, so he sort of's like, well, I guess I should come help at Baron. And, well, Baron dies the moment he arrives. It wasn't really a big deal. I get killed because I didn't clear this ward, and Orianna's being cheeky. Sadness for me. And now Talon makes another weird decision. He still doesn't go back to defend turrets. Instead, he's now going to try to push top. Which is, again, a really weird decision, because he doesn't have and he creeps with him, and he's not really going to be able to push this in the 20 seconds before the enemy team's back up without creeps. And he tries, he comes down here to do it without the creeps, but even with a Thornmail, he doesn't do enough damage to take out the turret before it would take him out. And so again, he kind of waffles and is a little wishy-washy and just backs away. And this is really a grade A example of how not to make a decision. He kinda sorta wanted to push, but he didn't really know what to do there. So he kinda sorta came to Baron, and that was already done because he'd kinda already started done this. He kinda sorta wanted to push this turret, and that really didn't work out either, and now he's running for his life, and okay, that didn't go so well either. So that sort of indecision is what you really do not want as a player. If you're going to make a decision, don't fret about whether it's right or wrong. Just go for it and make a wildly bad mistake so that when the time comes, it's really obvious that it was a mistake, that you could have done something better. Because when you just kind of try to make all the decisions at once, you don't make any decision, and that's really the worst mistake. There's really no worse situation than to make no decision at all. So we're kind of getting murdered without Talon. We're still really ahead on gold, but they're just, destroying our turrets and our objectives, and that's not going well for us. We're going to hold them off here, and I'm not going to spend my time dawdling about this. I'm going to go forward to our last moment of decision. We're going to go to the 49th minute. And here we are at the 49th minute, and this is the final decision point of the match. Now, before I rag on Talon a little bit more, I'm going to point out for the last time that he's actually been doing well. He's 17-9-8, maybe a few more deaths than we would like, but he's been absolutely phenomenal in team fights when he's present, and he's pretty good at this game. But what he isn't good at is decision making. And if we go to Talon Vision, we can see that we don't really have a very good sense of where the enemy team is. They were just right here, and Talon is walking past an important objective because he wants to backdoor. And really, this is a pretty terrible place to be, because all we know is where Skarner is. And I guess we know where Olaf is, but Varus and the rest of the team could be coming right here, and they could walk into the bush, and all of a sudden we would have a dead Talon. And that would not be very good for us at all. We're all the way back here. I'm going to ping the crap out of him and be like, why are you there? Can you please explain what you're doing? Please come back. We do not have any Nexus turrets. But he's going to sit in this bush, and he is going to make a very decisive decision, and a very decisive mistake. And, as I said before, that is the type of mistake you want to make. Make mistakes boldly, because if you don't make them boldly, you won't even know they were mistakes in the first place. But he really wants to backdoor these inhibitors, which is a fine enough goal. And the moment he sees the enemy team come out and start pushing mid, he bolts for the inhibitor, he wants to push it. And that's a very bold decision, and he's actually going to take the inhibitor. But that's also sort of a problem because the enemy team is like, hey, you know what we can do? We can just hit Shirelia's, and we can just book it for this Nexus, and we can take it. And Talon actually does take this inhibitor, and if he were to just kill this minion and hide around the corner really fast, he could make it back in time to possibly join this team fight and make something happen. Instead, he kind of comes here and does work on this inhibitor, and if he were to recall now, maybe he could make it. Maybe he could make it. Come on, Talon. Fuse is burning. Talon. Talon. Okay. No. That didn't really work. But at least he was decisive about it. He knew what he wanted to try to do, and he did it. It kind of didn't work, partly because he didn't have creep waves, but mostly because we didn't have Nexus turrets. Maybe if we had had Nexus turrets, the four of us could have dithered and delayed, and he might have been able to get something done here. But without creeps, without Nexus turrets, and without much to stop them from just barreling into our base and taking our Nexus, this did not end well. So that's an example of how game sense can be very, very important. This Talon, who I would like to point out, was much better at this game than Nunu was. Nunu had some very grave tactical missteps that, if he had more experience as a jungler, he might not have done, such as walking away from the Baron that's almost dead when you could consume it and smite it and it would be ours. That was not a good move. But in general, Talon did very well. He won his lane, he was able to be there for a number of team fights, we got ahead largely in part because of him. But when we got to the mid game, and when we got to the late game, his lack of game sense really showed. And if he were to actually sit down, and maybe even watch this show, and just go through all of this, he would be able to learn a little bit about how to just be better at that late game point, to take those wins that he should have had and secure them and come away with better ranking rather than going into the forums and complaining that ELO hell sucks and I hate playing this game. And again, just to go over things again, this is a very high level strategic thought process. This is very hard to do on the fly. If you're not used to doing it, if it's not a habit, you're very much stuck in the here and now, in the concrete, and that's normal. That's very typical, and it's very hard not to do that, because if you're going to micro, if you're going to do those clever little tricks that keep you alive as an AD carry and all of that fun stuff, it's very hard to divert your focus elsewhere, to look at the mini-map, to hear what your teammates are talking about, to see what their situations are, to see where was the last time that Skarner made an appearance, or where the mid was. All of that is very hard to keep track of, and until you learn to keep track of that, and until you learn to have the time to even think about it, game sense is a long time in coming. But if you put some effort in, nothing concerted, you don't need to sit down after every game and stare at your replay thoughtfully, stroking your beard if you have one, or petting a cat and laughing maniacally, or whatever else. You don't have to do that. But if, as you play, because experience is also a very critical part of this, just play, just try things on the spur of the moment, make those fantastic mistakes, and then just learn, you know what, that was a bad idea. Or in some cases you learn, hey, you know what, if we just all go to Baron the moment it spawns, we can kill it before the enemy team arrives. That's awesome. You can learn these things, and they're just absolutely fantastic tools to win games that otherwise you might have lost. And that's game sense. It's not something that I would expect somebody who doesn't have it to be able to just go, hey, I watched Mondays with Monte, now I know how to do everything, I'm going to go out there and win some games. This is going to take some time. It'll even be a little painful as you try to get your head around it and just get that experience in there to try those things. But over time, 100, 200 games, if you just keep this in mind, just play those games and don't stress too much about it, you will slowly develop game sense. I mean, look, the pros who've played thousands of games, probably 100 times the number of games that even I've played, even they can struggle with game sense. So don't feel bad if this is hard for you, because it's hard for everybody. It's hard for Hotshot GG, it's hard for Captain Jack, it's hard for everyone. But if you can practice it the same way as if you get better at creep score and everything else, you can get an edge on your opponents and you can win. So that is the bulk of today's Monday with Monte. I got through that a little faster than I anticipated, but if you have any questions, I will entertain them, and while you are throwing those up, I am going to just chill a little bit for myself. I've been told that it would be a lot more helpful if I had a little graphic linking to all the social media sites that I'm a part of. I have not had the chance to set that up due to other things, like being sick in the middle of the week. But in general, just any social media site, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, even here on Twitch, I am Montegomery LOL, and you can just follow me there. Please follow me here, and you can see me every Monday, and I even stream throughout the week. I will probably even stream later tonight. I have many duo queue misadventures with Miss Q, who was the Leona in that game, who did very, very well, and he actually in another game made a fairly fantastic mistake. There was a team fight where he used Shirelias, and we all went in, and it was a perfect mistake. I've never seen such a perfect mistake from an entire team in solo queue in a very long time. We all just went with the Shirelias into the enemy team, and got horribly butchered. Utterly and completely and unequivocally destroyed. And it was great because after that everyone was like, that probably was not a good idea. And that's how you learn. You got to make those fantastic mistakes and just, learn the next time. Hey, don't do that. Or, hey, I should always do that. That kind of thing. So, I don't see any questions right now, and I don't have anything in particular I plan to talk about outside of what I've already talked about. So I'd like to thank you all for your time and for watching Mondays with Monty. I will be here again next week, and I am in fact hopefully going to be able to do some special things on Christmas Eve and New Year's, which, if you have not been paying attention, do actually fall on Monday. They won't exactly be live shows, but if I can pull them off, if I can get the technology all set up, which will take a little bit of work, I'll be able to pre-record some stuff and have a Christmas Eve special and a New Year's Eve special, and those should be a lot of fun. So keep tuning in every week to Mondays with Monty, and I will keep analyzing, and I will keep trying to help you improve as a player, and hopefully we'll all have a good time of it at the same time. Well, delicious apples, I'm queuing up with Miss Q most of the time. If I ever want to have some sort of a joke cast or something, I will remember to spectate you or otherwise watch your games and try to find something worthy to talk about from there. But in the meantime, thank you all. Have a wonderful week and enjoy Season 3 because I've been having a lot of fun being horrible at AD carry. Just try out new things, and thank you all, and good night.